founder of Glue. Today is episode 151 and a half for the first ever live Identity Office Hours. So we're at KubeCon 2025. Despite the airline friction, a lot of people came. There has to be 10,000 plus people here. Quick reminder, follow us on LinkedIn. That really helps us. Our guest today, as you can see in person, is Alex Olivier, Chief Product Officer for Cerbos. Previous guests on episode 73 and 102. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks. Thank you. And I'm pleased to be one of the first guinea pigs on a live stream version of this format.
So every other conversation today is about AI and AI agents, and so that's the topic of today. And before we started, you mentioned that AI and workload identity is converging. So maybe we could just start on that. How do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can't walk the show floor here or hear a hallway conversation about someone's mentioning something about AI and agents. I mean, it's definitely the top of the top of one's mind at the moment. So yeah, there's kind of two interesting sort of developments going on. We have everything going on in the AI space, the MCP, the agents, et cetera, and we've also got on the infrastructure side of things this move to actual zero trust, and not just kind of the white paper. Where one of the core foundations of that is we need to start issuing actual identities to workloads. And if you look at sort of how these agents are evolving, a lot of the time these things are spun up, they're ephemeral, they do some action, and they then die. The conversation ends or whatever. There's stateful. There's various ways of doing it. But if we start looking at where these two trends are going, we now need to have an agent be able to do something and be able to do something across your services that needs some sort of identity attached to it. So this is where we're seeing at least the workload identity work going on, things like Spiffy, Whimsy, etc., come along and start to issue identities to agents, and then those identities can then be used to actually do their tasks as instructed by an LLM or
so some
else.
of our identity might challenge that
I'm
concept
sure.
say, does it really need an identity, or does it need what does that mean to you? Because some people will say, is it an identifier? Does it need an identifier so we can audit it, or does it need claims so we can authorize it? So what does that mean to you?
I mean, we kind of run into the delegation problem very quickly, because if you look at what some of these agents are doing, particularly the ones that are being instructed by an upstream human. So I'm one of our kind of users. They're a big organization. They have lots of teams doing lots of different things. They want to start exposing behavior and activity across the organization in the form of agents, MCP, so in the actual implementation. So teams are spinning these up, and they need to be able to not only be able to make these a shared service across the organization, but they also now need to make sure they can secure, control, and manage those. I think we spent the last year, maybe 2 years, experimenting on the testbed and in the lab of what the agents can do. We're now reaching into the world of actual productionizing these things to do real business use cases. And so we need to make sure we have the same level of security controls around it. The bad model here is where we start giving them like a service account that has broad access to do basically anything without understanding kind of the overarching security model of the business. And if you look at more of an enterprise setting, we need to actually understand this kind of delegation of responsibility and making sure we're not just handing off your Google account, say, to some agent that's going to do something on your behalf, where it has access to your calendar, your email, and everything, but it's only doing a job that, say, is managing your calendar. We need to make sure we have a scope down identity and permissioning around it.
So before we get to bring the human involved and get the agent acting on behalf of the human, I just want to focus for a second on the agent itself. So the agent spools up somehow, and I've heard, I think a lot of people sort of, they project all of their hopes and aspirations on Spiffy. They're like, oh, well, it created, it did a Spiffy registration through Spire, and now I'm done. But there's a couple of ways you could register software today. We could register, it could do dynamic client registration. Aaron Parecki and I discussed client metadata, where the client might assert a URI where perhaps the software might fetch its metadata, all the information about it, its identifier, and also its claims and its public key, perhaps. But where do you stand on that part of it? Which of these models should agents follow today?
So I think we talked about this actually last night at a workload identity event. Like, there's a lot of excitement and like interesting new stuff we can do with this, but actually a lot of the problems we're trying to solve now if we look at just the agent space, we're actually solved 5, 10, 15 years ago for like the generic IAM sort of journey. So there's lots of principles. Like we don't have to go and reach and build in a brand new spec. If you look at what's happening, for example, the client metadata, these are like just evolutions on top of existing capabilities. And what I'm actually kind of hoping for is, as we find these cases where agents are behaving slightly differently, let's go and like maybe retrofit or let's go and extend the existing specification rather than coming up with some brand new stack. And hopefully we get some best practice built in from day one, because this is this is the current, I guess, scenario where there's a whole new suite technology being built. See what the next hype is. But I also kind of hope that some of this will go kind of be backported as well to sort of our understanding of what's going on.
I was laughing because I have an official answer for this.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, you're absolutely right. It would be the LLM answer. I think we just need to get the foundations right. Everything needs an identity, a trusted identity from some source.
Yeah.
We need to be able to attribute actions to an identity. And we also need to be able to put controls around what services or agents given some identity can do, like authorization and those kind of capabilities.
Yeah, this is where it kind of goes in circles. So I guess there's a range of agents, and maybe in some models, OAuth might be the right model. OAuth client registration with public keys and perhaps even attestations from platforms or et cetera. And other times that might not be called for. And I feel like it's just a very embryonic state right now, where I think I saw a recent study by Asterix about MCP servers on GitHub, and there was like 10,000 of them.
Yes, all of them probably have some sort of hard-coded credential in them somewhere.
Most of I think 45% of them had an API key. Only 8% of them were using OAuth.
Yeah.
But I think to me that says there's an opportunity in this area. Like when the developers just use an API key, that's basically just saying we're going to do this. We're going to figure this out later.
Yeah. I mean, this is where it kind of pains me a bit, because if you go and look at OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, all these models, this is the chance where developers are like jumping on this stuff and want to build things, but they're still just issuing a API key as a string, a hard-coded string that you go and dump in an M file.
It's like a username without a password.
Exactly,
but a hard-to-guess username.
Very well, yeah. But like, it's gotta be nice if we could have started at least with like a certificate or something, rather than moving to this world where we're just giving out API keys that are going to be checked in. And then also all the LLMs that are now churning out these vibe coded apps kind of expect there to be an
if you're going
to
put a secret in there, at least show how you use the secrets manager properly, or environment variables, for God's sakes, something.
Yeah.
So let's actually pivot a little bit to MCP. So when I first heard it, I thought it was a little dismissive because it sounds like CGI bin for AI. But now, now I'm starting to actually, I think, want to get on the bandwagon, because I see that, systems and websites want to build an AI interface, because, people, I saw a session today about mission control, tracking satellites, and the satellite telemetry is always going bad. And they're like, I just want to tell it, generate this report and fix whatever's wrong, if it fails. And the answer is put an MCP server in front of there so you can handle that business logic with code. So I think it's here to stay. But I'm wondering, what are your reservations about MCP?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I think we're now a year maybe into the MCP spec being a thing, and the next version is about to come out with like long-running tasks and those things as well, which solves some of the problems. We now have OAuth, thank God, now set up properly, because the original version was.
I would say we have a starting point for certain use cases to use OAuth, but I feel like there's a lot of use cases that are still unaddressed and it's still untested.
Yeah, absolutely. But I completely agree with you.
And I'm a fan of OAuth.
I'm very much aware. I definitely agree with you that what MCP is doing is like definitely the right idea. The idea of to extend functionality out to these kind of AI kind of apps, not just call them agents, but AI app use cases. The issue that I think is now starting to come up as people are starting to build, there's 10,000 MCP servers on GitHub, is you start adding more than maybe a few of these into your, your Claude or whatever your Goose or whatever your agent of choice, your cursor of choices. You end up polluting your token space, because every time MCP server starts, it advertises, here's all the amazing tools I have that can do all these amazing things, and they'll sometimes have quite long descriptions. And by the time you have maybe a few of these, you're being linear, you're being GitHub, you're being Figma, whatever your tools of choice are, out of your 100,000, 250,000 token window, you're starting to chip away at how much actual token space you have for your actual use of that model, because it's being populated or polluted with all these tool descriptions. And there's some interesting work going on right now around like selective disclosure of tools. There's semantic search MCP, like RAG over MCP tool descriptions. So I think there's some, the concept's right. I think there's some implementations we need to kind of figure out around that. And then from a security model perspective as well, should you even be able to see all the available tools based on who you are? Like the work we've done with Cerbos is plugging into these MCP frameworks like fast MCP and these kind of things. So as a MCP server author, you can then start putting policy around who can see which tools, who can call which tools, who can see which resources, who can see which prompts, and doing that coarse-grained and fine-grained authorization around what tools are even exposed to you as a user, and then when you do call them, whether you're even allowed to call them with those particular arguments. It's not something that's defined in the spec. The Anthropic sort of MCP spec says you do authentication, authorization.
Right. I was talking with one of the Cedar team members, and he mentioned that part of MCP is there's a discovery function where you can discover the capabilities of agents. I personally think there's a lot of work that needs to be, like, agents have special metadata, and we need more work around discovery in particular. It's like very early where that discovery is, but I could see some tooling around discovering the capabilities if you're an organization, using that interface to discover the capabilities and then trying to build policy around it.
Yeah, and there's kind of some early work. I know a tool over at Signal has been doing around like an enterprise profile for MCP, where you start putting some of those controls via metadata. It's kind of interesting. He did a talk a couple months ago about that. But we also look at from like the consumer perspective or an enterprise. You have kind of two types of MCP servers. You're going to have your internal in-house built ones that are maybe exposing internal, data sources, data sets, and functionality. But then you also end up this kind of like, I'm calling it the shadow IT 2.0 problem, where you have some employee that's trying to be very efficient at their job, and they go and spin up Claude or whatever, and they go and click connect, and it connects to your linear, your GitHub or whatever, and you end up with this sort of uncontrolled data access going on. Essentially, it's not through your corporate kind of security structure.
Right. So that's a point that I've been making to people, is that actually one of the things, these problems that we're having around agent security, they've been there forever.
Yeah, they're not new. A lot of this stuff, like I was saying this last night at this workload event, the problems with
it wasn't a board level concern where your board was asking you how you're using AI to improve productivity and drive down, et cetera, et cetera. And now the deficiencies have become more obvious. I forgot my point about this, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. If we address particularly that case where you're talking to external MCP servers inside of your organization,
that was it. Yeah.
Like, what are the solutions to this? Do you go and stick a proxy in front? There's some really interesting work going on with the agent gateway under the CNCF project, as we're at KubeCon, to be kind of that gateway, that middle layer. And a lot of the
there's a million gateways though.
Well,
you throw a rock and you hit 10 gateways.
I mean, yes, and like all the API gateways are now supporting MCP.
Why wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, it's just JSON over HTTP at the end of the day in most cases. And that's kind of one approach. You now have this kind of single point, and that's where you can put enterprise level security controls in place.
Of course, it's always been a good place to enforce security policies.
And to your point, which seems like everyone's trying to solve the problems that we solved 10, 15 years ago.
Or I think I would say that we still haven't solved the problems that we were struggling to solve.
Yeah.
Like we started with UMA, which was just about Alice to Bob sharing.
Yeah.
Now Alice to Bob sharing is actually that's a simple use case in AI. It doesn't involve multiple delegations of different AI servers downstream. But thank you for reminding me of the point, which was that actually some of our challenges around MCPs traversing trust boundaries. So internal trust boundaries, like I came out of finance, and in finance we had an advisory side and a trading side. And there was a wall, which we called it like a firewall, different type of firewall, but there was a firewall between those two sides, because we couldn't have advisory feeding trading information about deals or mergers, right? So So interdomain, we have these trust issues, and this is affecting MCP servers, which could be at multiple divisions, but
Yeah.
also outside. You might have, like you mentioned, not shadow IT, but you might have partners that are outside of your trust boundary, your enterprise, domain boundary.
Yep.
And so NCP is stressing sort of those pain points a little bit, I think.
Yeah, maybe to get maybe a bit more philosophical about things. If you start, what ultimately these new challenges are exposing is basically how the flaws or how bad our existing infrastructure was. Because if you think of like what an agent's doing, if you kind of anthropomorphize it and think of it as more of like a human, it's going and doing actions maybe on behalf of someone, but ultimately it's doing some actions. And if it was like an employee and company, they would kind of know what was right and wrong and what they shouldn't do, or maybe question things. These models are just going to try everything all at once and try every single access that's exposed to it and start executing things without any kind of moral
Make
compass.
the human happy.
Well, exactly. And if it can go and do something that a human probably wouldn't do because their moral compass would kick in, let's say, or their InfoSec training might kick in, then that's only really exposing a flaw in the security model that your system already has. It's nothing new. It's highlighting worse what you already have in place, and you don't have proper authentication, authorization, trust boundaries in place.
I sort of joke that we don't have the way to discover agents. We don't have a way to register agents. We don't have a way to authenticate agents. We don't have a way for them to interact with humans and issue them tokens that represent evidence of those delegations. And then we don't have a way to make policies about those tokens. So we're missing. It's not even a trifecta. It's a whole landscape of security deficiencies.
Yeah. I mean, some of the early direction that I think quite a few of us in this space are going is like, let's at least get to the on behalf of type point. So here's an agent acting on behalf of Mike. And we can, in policy at least, we can be minted a token that has claims of the identity, the workload, but also potentially your claims or a scope set of those complaints. And at least that's something to start rationalizing, token-based access control, to start making decisions at a policy layer at least just that point where this is an action being done by an agent on behalf of someone. Then there's a whole load of work that still needs to be done from a kind of standards perspective around how we do those delegation chains in more depth. But at least getting to that on behalf of point is, I think, the first step that we need to get to, because the alternative is we just fall into the trap of all these browser use, computer use agents that just take over your Chrome instance and act as you, and we have no point as security sort of practitioners to control those.
Right. So back in June or so of this year, we were at Identiverse.
Yep.
And we did a session on embeddable PDPs.
We did.
And everyone, a lot of the audience knows I've been telling everyone about Murderbot. And Murderbot's not particularly murdery, by the way. He's a murder prevention bot. He stops the humans from murdering each other.
Okay.
But it might involve some murder. But he's a bot with guns, which ups the stakes a lot. For our agents today aren't armed, so the stakes aren't quite as high. But these stories are good because they push us to the edges. And one of the premises of the show, you find out in the first scene, is that the Murderbot has a governor module embedded. It's like an embedded PDP. Are we getting to this point where perhaps we need to when we think of our agent architecture, we tend to think of connections to back-end systems.
Yeah.
But I want a little brain in there, or a little, I don't know what you should call it, maybe so something, a PDP, where the question is, should I make this call? Am I just not a massive confused deputy machine?
Yeah, it's like, what's the prime directive of that device?
Yeah, what are your prime directives as an agent, and how
as a MOS laws as a service?
Yeah. So what do you guys have an embeddable PDP? You're right on the edge of this area. So what are your thoughts about embedding the PDP in the agent itself?
So I'm sure you've had, we've definitely had the discussion, but I'm sure you hear it from others as well. It's like, where are you going to put LLMs? How are you going to use AI inside your business? How are you going to do things better? And we hear it kind of with Cerbos as ultimately an externalized authorization management platform. And my answer to that is definitely we should go and look and experiment and see how AI and LLMs can leverage us to help you author policies and kind of go from that spreadsheet of permissions to an actual policy. And on the back end, where your audit logs, we can definitely use these tools to help us understand behavior and maybe highlight areas where we could scope down access or remove over permission roles and those kind of things. But that middle bit that actually makes the decision should be 100% deterministic, because you do not want someone hallucinating an allow when there should be a deny, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And being able to push this PDP, that concept, to as many different layers of the architecture as possible, I think is the direction things have to go in. So down to an agent, down to a workload, down to the underlying infrastructure, down to physical hardware around the world. And it's just kind of, we've always been talking about shift left, haven't we? So we're taking the security model and kind of pushing it down more into the software development lifecycle, handing it off to devs to manage. I think really we need to be thinking more about shift down, where things like authentication, authorization become these kind of common shared components in the architecture, and whether it's deployed as a service or an embeddable PDP as a WASM module or whatever, being able to make it basically this unique, ubiquitous component, so it can go into your agent, but it's also in your service mesh, it's also in your database, it's also in your gateway, it's also in your microservices. So it's this ubiquitous and distributed
visioning. You're very aligned with my zero trust vision, Alex.
Well, I mean, I mean, good. You've been doing this longer than me. I hope you don't want me saying. And to the whole zero trust point, I think we've been talking about it for so long, but I feel like we're at the point where technology is kind of caught up, where we have the components, we have the workloads, we have the distribution systems, we have PKI infrastructure that scales, we have concepts like Kubernetes, we have sidecars. All the things are now finally here, where we can actually have zero trust, where your trust domain is essentially down to a single request to a single service, and we're reaching that point thanks to things like embeddable PDPs.
If I hear one more presentation about how my proxy gives you zero trust, I think I'm going to scream, because isn't the definition of zero trust that the proxy is one component that can't be trusted?
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but I think there's going to be a very interesting set of developments that are going to have to happen in the next 6 to 12 months around how do we bring zero trust to legacy applications which just don't have hooks. And right now the sort of hit it over the head with a stick type approach is to whack a reverse proxy in front of it and make sure nothing goes into the box where that legacy application is running, and having policy to control what goes in through that proxy. But there's going to be a whole suite of basically existing applications and enterprise applications and things written in COBOL that we touched for 40 years or whatever that we can't bring proper zero trust to. So what's the zero-ish trust or the 0.1 trust that we can bring to those models?
As long as, if we don't call it zero trust and we're admitting failure there, that we didn't fail.
Yeah, we're on episode 151.5, so we can start doing points.
I saw a presentation yesterday here at KubeCon by some developers at IBM and Red Hat about they were presenting their proxy and their Keycloak solution as a zero trust. And so, one thing I liked about the presentation was they were talking about token exchange and how there's a token exchange at every point. So you never, one of the problems with passing tokens downstream is that you lose the proof of possession to the client, and how do you differentiate it from a stolen token? So that's a real problem. So I like the idea that we're that we're creating a token that's custom minted for this application, where the application can understand that it can prove that it's not stolen. But then I think a lot of the conception is that the token itself is the authorization. They conflate the issuing of the token, it's easily done, and then you say, okay, but what did you do with that token? What's your policy about that token? How does the application actually do it? But what are your thoughts on? I wanted to get your quick thoughts on this transaction token or the doing token exchange a lot more frequently. Do you also see that as a trend with a lot, or in the field, is it not something that it's just too complicated?
Yeah. So what we're seeing from our users is, because we're approaching things from authorization at the application level primarily. And everyone's like, yeah, we have policy, we can control what users do in the applications. The next layer down is kind of the application service-to-service calls and those kind of things. And everyone's starting to hear about Spiffy, they're starting to hear about workload identity. We're seeing all the cloud providers are now moving to a point where they're having managed workload identities. And then there's a bit of uptake on that side of things. I think transaction tokens is the right direction, but I think we're a long way from mass adoption of that as a concept. And token exchange is a very powerful mechanism. I think there's some questions still about the scalability of that potentially. But I really buy into this concept of minting or exchanging for a token that has in it context for the actual transaction to kind of again bring that trust perimeter down, or the authorization perimeter down to a single transaction that's going across multiple services, because we also have the distributed compute problem to solve here. And I think transaction tokens right now and what's going on inside of the OAuth working group with that is definitely a step in the right direction. And I'd love to see, well, I'm looking forward to seeing where that evolves to. And that's just more context when you make a fine-grained authorization decision. Who's the user, who's the workload, what's the transaction it's beyond, and then having policy around that.
I like the transaction tokens as a standard framework for doing a token exchange. But I think you could use token exchange in different ways. It doesn't have to be transaction tokens, but I think transaction tokens is close to final. So it gives you a sort of envelope for your token exchange where you have some expectations, but then you can put whatever the heck you want in it. So as a vendor who mints these things, it's nice to have at least a baseline of what this token exchange looks like. We haven't seen massive adoption. I've been advocating for it. Yahoo did. I did an episode right after Identiverse about Yahoo did a token exchange implementation at scale, a really big one. I think it does scale really well. I wonder if their message about the benefits of that are going to be clear. And I wonder also, like, okay, fine, you have the transaction token. You still have to make policies about it. You still have to trust it.
I mean, I saw someone the other day, and I was like, well, our transaction token is going to kind of replace authorization or fine-grained authorization. I think the answer is no. It's just a signed mechanism or wrapper to kind of get context. It's input to policy. And I think back to your earlier point of how authentication, authorization, they kind of get molded up as concepts, and like, what's authorization? Is that just a token with claims? Or now it's a transaction token? But then you still need to do that finer, real-time, continuous contextual authorization check using policy at execution time. And when all this upstream stuff, transaction tokens, workload identities, and things have been resolved, you still need to make a in-the-moment decision whether a particular action should be allowed or not. And that's where fine-grained authorization really kind of comes in.
Well, we can pick this conversation up in about a month at Gartner IAM, which I hear I'm now going thanks to the authzen interop.
And Glue of part of that interop. I'm very excited.
We got the IDP part working.
We did.
So partial evaluation or whatever, we were like, no, we're not going there. But getting it to work from our IDP, I think, was a one-day job for us. He literally, our engineer, I assigned it to him and it was done before I was like, what do you mean it's done? He was, oh, it's done. So, well, that's a good sign for implementing, for how easy it is to implement, I guess.
So we've done kind of the application use case, the API gateway use case. Now we're doing the IDP use case. And then the spec is going to 1.0 end of this year. And it's out for vote next week, I think.
So
exciting times.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think that we're going to keep it short for this first in-person one. The next episode is TBD. I might do a couple more while I'm here, but if not, next Tuesday we're going to have an episode from the former acting Social Security Administration Director, which should be interesting, on his lessons learned from running the SSA for 3 months. So we will hear.
It's all about European IDs, isn't it?
And with that, thank you, Alex. Thank you, audience, and we'll see you later.